If we go back to basics, the very earliest was an FM only synth.
That's with the inside one.
With the original keyboard, which had no touch sensitivity, no pressure, and no velocity. That was upgraded to be a mono sampling system with a hard disk. It was the world's first hard disk commercial.
The Winchesters,
in no AMS that they were. It was a single 5 megabyte Winchester that cost thousands of dollars, because in the early 80s, 5 megabytes was considered huge. These were running on 32K core memory. And they had no room for sample memory, so an external hard disk, which could only trigger one sound at a time, a maximum of 50 kilohertz sample rate. At that time, we didn't have the 44.1 or 48 that became the standard, so they worked out that physically, technically, 50 kilohertz is the sweet spot when you're recording across a keyboard. After that, they came up with the sampling side. Now that was what they called stereo, but it was in fact panning stereo, left and right. Could play stereo sounds, but it could also play a mono sound out of left and right, but adjust the balance of that, the pan.
Because at the moment, the only sound I can get out of it was coming out of the...
Yeah, the FM only comes out the opposite, so I'll explain why. And because the original FM was mono only, because these were panning left and right, they doubled up on the FM, so you had one bank for left, one bank for right, effectively. At a huge cost, people would upgrade their FM systems to this pseudo stereo, so you could then combine the polysampling with the FM. Then you had the multi-channel output, which they all came through. You could route them to any particular...
Which this one has.
Out. Later years, I removed the FM from the multi-channel output because you put a lot of noise on, or noise floor on it, and they're much louder, can be much louder in sound than FM sound, than a sampling sound, and it was overpowering, because it gave a better balance. Plus, this is what the users wanted. Here, the FM comes out with its own little panel here, right, with the original EQ switches. That gives the original sound of Synclavier there. You wouldn't like it coming out of here. I wanted the old sound, so it was retro-modified to have not come out the multi-channel and be disconnected from.
They're similar to the MPCs when they put filters in their outputs.
Yeah, it's only a basic EQ switching there.
So really, we're going to need a little mixer here, aren't we?
Ideally, because the 3200, after the PSMTs, it's called, polysampling multi-tower, we had the 9600, which was a complete redesign and rebuild of the same thing, effectively. They used the money, they sold the FM technology to Yamaha for quite a large sum, and they developed the DX7 bass type. The difference being nobody can program a DX7. If you can, you're a better man than anyone of it.
I'm a DX7 lover, I'm afraid.
Yeah. You can program one?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you're the first person
That's why I'm really keen to get into the FM
That's why you need the book.
Yeah.
It's much easier to program, and you can get some great sounds. Plus, you sample a sound in,
and then use a freight,
and then convert it to an FM sound.
Right.
So you can, and then you can play around with it however you like. And then that's where you can really.
Yeah. Some frames and crossfades and stuff. Is that right?
Yeah. But there's also an auto function for resynthesis. I'm jumping ahead of myself. So they came up with this new module with the money they had from Yamaha. They redesigned it, rebuilt it, which was twice the size and twice the weight of the original one, which I used to tease President in America about. This glass fiber cladding, for example, is extremely heavy, and the tall ones, a 9600, it called a 9600 because it could have 96 voices, and had to have a huge lead plating in the bottom for safety reasons, so if you pushed it into both, it would stand back up again. So big ones, they come way up to 500 pounds, which is what, over 200 kilograms. It was enormously heavy. I mean, if you think this one sec. Pete bought this one, he already had a 9600. He bought the 3200, which was designed only to have 32 voices, as a portable unit. And he used to have his guys, he was in a hotel room, he said, bring my Synclavier.
Just like that.
Yeah. Sometimes the lift couldn't cope with him. I was surprised how heavy the actual keyboard is as well. And it's mahogany. Oh yeah, stepping aside to the keyboard, these buttons here, they're rather magical, and I can explain why. They're not overpowering bright in a dark studio. Yeah, you can see them from every angle.
Yeah.
And yet if the sunlight's falling on them, you can still see them lit. And they're very touch sensitive, and they've lasted.
I've heard rumours that they came from bombers. Yeah. Okay.
I read that. The reason they're like that is because the planes used to turn around. One side was bright sunshine, and one side was darkness, so they needed buttons. They really, the guys at Dartmouth College who were designing the Synclavier, some of their co-students would go on to work for Boeing and NASA and whatever. So that's where they got these ideas from their friends. Well, what can we use? It's been a joy, because this is 1990 now, so 34 years old, still working like they're doing.
It's incredible, isn't it?
If they don't, all I do is I put some store of a WD-40 down here, and then just exercise the buttons, and they're like new again. Sometimes you get the sweat of users. Getting so many years, and the buttons get a bit sticky. So I find that WD-40 cleans them, and for 20 years it hasn't done them any damage. Yeah, it's solid wood. I mean, it's proper real wood. Oh yes, and often things get dropped down under the keys. Things like when I've stripped these down to clean them, and it's a bit of a pit to take them apart. I found all sorts of things, mostly guitar plectrums. But I found traces of Coca-Cola.
This is why we should not drink in this room.
Damaging thing to electronic. Go back to this. This was originally mono, 32 voice sampling only. It's the only option. And mono means they all come out the left, which is why the poly output is one side only. The 9600, the bigger brother of it, had stereo voices, as it's called. They're panny. And what happens is that you can either have a stereo voice, which uses two separate voices of the 32, or you can have a one voice panning, and you can decide how it lands, and you can move it around in real time. And they are completely separate outputs. The reason this is so big and it has so much, costs so much, is because the internal electronics are rather like stacking 32 samplers one on top of the other. They don't share the circuitry. Each one has its own individual circuitry running through. It then goes to the DACs, and it has two DACs for each voice, one left, one right. Their volume is controlled by a computer-controlled analog controller, so that means that when...
Is that after the DAC?
That's after the DAC. It's actually in the analog side, computer-controlled analog volume control, which means that...
VCA.
Yes, VCA. Yes, so what that means is, when this goes down to zero volume, there's still a full 16-bit resolution. It's all done in the analog domain, and that's very rare. I don't know anything else that does it. There's no digital mixing at all. They're all separated in the analog domain, all 32 voices.
So wow, then.
Oh, it's 64, actually, in reality.
And then it must be summed back a moment to that one out to that.
Yeah, at the moment where you're using it, you're only getting the left side, actually, coming out of there. This is the one you should be using. You should be getting an output. I'll have a look at that in a minute. There. Now, it then goes through to the MCO, the multi-channel output. That is computer-controlled 100% analog. So we keep it in the analog domain. Why doing that? We keep total separation. If a sound is there in the stereo spectrum, it stays there. And when you've got a full orchestra playing on one of these big things, you can pick out all the different instruments, and they all stay phase locked. There's no phasing or interfering with any other voice, but it's all in the analog domain, which was very clever, very expensive, and nobody could afford to reproduce it. Yamaha did look at it, but they said nobody would buy it. There's so much hardware involved, and it's so much easier to mathematically solve.
And is it like the Fairlight where it has an analog filter after it, or?
No joke. Everybody used to moan about that. I'm only got filters. And they said, well, you can add a filter on afterwards if you want. But we, the sound is Synclavier sound. Very, very low, it goes down to DC. The FM, but down to DC. There's no filter stopping it. Also, because it's up to 100 kilohertz, we've got no filters blocking it at 20 kbps. In those days, all the samples were blocked, and we could get the kind of resolution they get nowadays, way back in the 80s, so 100K sound. However, discs were extremely expensive, and RAM was extremely expensive. The RAM used in this was used by Boeing and NASA, and pretty much no one else. We needed so much of it, and it would cost something like $24,000 for one 64 megabyte RAM sound. But in those days, 64 megabyte was like 64 terabytes.
Yeah.
It was extreme.
No one could count that many floppies.
But it was enough. Still, the core memory in these things were 64K for the main processor and 1 megabyte for the software. And it still was up until 2000. And it was enough. I mean, back in the 80s, you could have a complete database on 64K of memory, and they worked.
How much was it? What did you about today?
Depends what you bought, but no two were the same. You used to spec your system. The most expensive one we sold was $500,000. This one, as a budget one, would have cost between 80 and 120 in its original form, and it came with no keyboard. This really was the budget one. You were supposed to use a MIDI keyboard and just have 32 mono voices, which meant we couldn't band, but it would play stereo sound.
And then damage to the separate computer at that point, or?
That had a Mac with not a laptop, and it communicated. The Mac was used just as a dumb terminal. It was an RS-232 terminal, a graphics terminal, emulating for a huge price for what it did. It didn't do any of the brains. The brains was cool.
I guess they started the software and the Mac out.
This is a different process and change. This is something that Pete and Benny and I arranged after 2000, when we said, look, we've got to be able to use laptops and everything. So we paid Cameron Jones to redesign the software and the hardware so that we could use modern Macs and take the processor out of the Synclavier because it was old and weary. And now you've got a black box here, which contains the processor hidden inside there.
With what's he using?
Oh no, that's designed by Synclavier. The original computer that came in here is called an Able, designed by Cameron Jones and Sidney Alonso at Dartmouth College, along with their lecturer who was involved in it as well. And it was so efficient, and it's completely unique. It's only used by Synclavier, Boeing, NASA, and the American Secret Service. And there's one in space, or there was, it's been destroyed out of satellite. One photographing Jupiter's moons. They put it on a satellite, space probe, because it was so efficient and so light. So there's a Synclavier is light. Most people don't know all this stuff. Anyway, so we were tied down, because this was at the time when Russia and America weren't friendly. And every customer had to sign what was called a COCAN agreement, that they would not sell their product to an unfriendly state.
Right.
And if they resold it on, they had to notify us so that the American...
That's how advanced their technology was.
It was so different. And they didn't want anybody to see how they could do it. That was different, I mean, when you're using it. Well, when the wall came down, we did sell one to Russia, but I very much doubt they maintained it. TV company bought it. Because later on, because of the power of the sound design and the hard disk recording, which just doesn't put it, there's a separate unit for hard disk recording, it was used in filming. The Hollywood composers were using these to compose the music. The sound design guys were designing sound on it, and other guys were doing the ADR, recording the dialogue and editing the sound to it. Another thing this does, talking of sound to picture, it became very popular in the early 90s for it, because this still to this day can do things nothing else can do. One thing unique to it was a SEMTI time tracker. I don't know whether you've experienced it. If you've got a video and you slow it down, this actually measures it frame by frame and slows the sound down in real time, perfectly, spread out the length of the note, don't change the pitch, and then change the length of the decay, so that when you're watching the film in slow motion, if you're doing footsteps, for example, as the foot goes down, you press it, you have footsteps. Layers the keyboard. We did it. And we used to do shows in theatres, showing people how we did it. And we do it in...
Was that using that sequencer or stereo sequencer?
There was nothing else than this and a SMPTE feed and a video tape, which was supplying SMPTE. So that we slow down the video tape and then press the keys in time with the footsteps. Not the same ones. We had a whole load. So as one went scrape, we'd have a scrape. And then we'd play it back in real time and it'd be absolutely perfect. And nothing else could do that at the time, because everything else used to lock onto SMPTE and then it freewheeled, assuming it was all going to go at the same speed. This didn't. It measured every frame coming in. And the SMPTE could take over the clock of the system. That's... everything's individual. Like the keyboard can take over the clock of the system. The SMPTE could. Various other... the MIDI could. All sorts of feeds. All can override the system so that you weren't locked into the computer doing everything. Which was really old technology, but it just worked so well for this environment, which is why it was so powerful. And it had so many uses. Going back to this one, yes, this originally had mono voices and nothing else, no keyboard. So keyboard panel afterwards, that was a later retrofit. The FM I had to squeeze in because there's not a lot of room in there. I've changed it to stereo, what we call stereo for panning voices, which means that you have left and right. Even if it's a mono sound, you can put it left and right and move it in real time. There's hundreds of RTEs on here, real-time effects, which you can use foot pedals, clocks, or any kind, where you can manipulate the sound in real time. Well, you need the book. I explain how you can do this.
Right.
And you've got so many layers of sound, FM and poly, all mixed something, all mixed together, all controlled differently as to how you press the velocity, the pressure, foot pedal. You see, we've got a mouth
Breath controller, yeah.
breath controller input, yeah, and a ribbon controller here to either take a guitar, pitch
Oh,
bell,
I never even noticed that.
and the mod wheel, obviously. You can assign them to anything.
And can you just explain again, you said this didn't have FM, and you added the FM.
This is in the FM ZP.
Yeah.
This does not come, this is the only 3200 in the world with FM in it.
That blows my mind. So most Synclaviers didn't have the FM, or did...
Well, I don't know. The 3200 was just the mini one.
Right.
There was a 6400 as well, which...
Oh, that had FM and something.
No, that still didn't have FM.
Yeah?
That, I don't know why they called it. That was the 3200 with a keyboard and stereo voices, or panning voice. So it had 64 voices in effect, but it's still only 32 really. Just to set it aside from the 32. And then you had the 9600, which Pete's also got, which could have up to 96 panning voices, which means you've got 198 DACs. Because each voice pans left and right with separate DACs. And you could have FM as well. So you could have up to 128 voices. And Benny's got one of those, Benny Andersson, who I've just come back working from with, and he can do the entire orchestra in it, play it to the orchestra and say, that's how I want it to sound. And, in one famous case, the orchestra said of a film, well, why do you need that? Because I only like live music. I believe in live musicians. Yeah. I'm just doing this so you know how it...
And does it still use this?
Sorry?
Does Benny still use Synclavier?
Every single day.
Really?
Every day. He doesn't, he said this before, he doesn't need to do it, but he can't stop. Every day he comes into the studio, he's got customers, lovely little room with just a Synclavier and a grand piano, and he thinks, how is it? And he's got his own orchestra, Benny Andersson Orchestra, and they just released a new album. But yeah, he does film work, TV work. He never stops. He's been my hero because he doesn't need to work.
Yeah.
But he's dedicated. I've installed a Synclavier in his summer house so that he can carry on working when they have 3 months down by the sea.
Crazy.
So this is the 32.
This is a 32 one.
But it has FM. I have this stereo voices till this month's done. And how many DACs does it have?
This one has 32 voices that are panning.
Yeah.
And so it has 64 DACs. 64 DACs.
And the way I was trying to work out, does it have a RAM alpha count? Is the RAM in the hardware?
Yeah, the sample RAM's inside here. Yeah, I'm not sure how much it's got, but it'll buy the beats 32 or 64. Any amount of it's got a projector wheel clock with it all locked to, and a 50 hertz clock that it'll lock to, and it's got an audio input it'll lock to.
So we can plug from our dot holes.
Yes, and you could filter a bass drum because it's got an audio.
Yeah.
For example, put it in here and this will follow it. The sequence will follow it. If you just sort of like do that, it's immediately in empty. It's tracking empty, and you press the sequence and now nothing will happen until it gets a empty feed. It's that fast. Very intuitive. A lot of the film people will buy is still at this old equipment. So they made it compatible. As I said, this was the users that drove this forward. They would have come forward and say, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? I mean, and Stevie Wonder, I mean, he had to operate entirely from the button. He couldn't see a screen or anything. So he had a Synclavier famously, and also famously at Live Aid, he brought his same Synclavier with him at Live Aid concert. And in those days, it hasn't got it anymore, but it's got a hole for it. As it still has got its floppy drive, because I put it from the floppy drive, but it had an external floppy drive that would sit on top of the keyboard. Where somebody stole that. And when he was due to come on, he couldn't start the system, or its tech couldn't. And so they had to rush him. There was a delay, and they put somebody else on in his place. But it just so happened that Synclavier tech that day was walking across the car park, and he saw, it's very unique, it's a big black metal box. A guy walking across the car park with a floppy drive under his arm. I mean, they accosted him and said, what are you doing with that? I don't know the exact story, but anyway, he put it back. They did back on stage and it enabled Stevie Wonder to play. Without it, you couldn't start a machine.